Did the breakdown of one relationship actually expose a fatal psychological script for one man that no one could have predicted or should have stopped? The facts of this case involving Prosenjit Poddar and Tatiana Tarasoff didn't just lead to a tragic preventable murder in 1969. They created a legal earthquake, permanently reshaping the world of mental health ethics by questioning the core principle of client confidentiality versus the safety of a potential victim. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and this is my mental health analysis of the Tarasoff case. I will be focusing on the main mental health and psychological indicators while providing the backstory. I don't just talk about the crimes. I talk about the psychology behind the crimes and the mysteries that captivate us. I look beyond the facts of the case to understand the why of the crime. My analysis is based on my speculations, not a diagnosis of anyone involved in this case. The first compelling psychological red flag that we see in Prosenjit is the immediate and intense reaction to a casual romantic connection in a new and overwhelming environment. Prosenjit was an international graduate student from India, arrived at the University of California in Berkeley in 1967. He came from a Dalit, a group considered outside the Hindu caste system, which meant navigating significant social and cultural hurdles, even with his high academic achievement. This background, combined with the culture shock of the 1960s Bay Area, likely amplified a pre-existing psychological vulnerability to isolation and a profound need for acceptance. In late 1968, he met Tatiana Tarasoff, a vibrant, non-committal student at a folk dance class. Their connection, marked by a New Year's Eve kiss, was interpreted by Poddar as a serious, exclusive relationship, a bond far deeper than Tatiana intended. How does an intense, unreciprocated fixation escalate from a simple hurt feelings to a calculated homicidal threat? The immediate, rigid interpretation of this brief connection is the first profound psychological red flag. It's a distorted reality and rapid fixation. Poddar developed what some experts later characterized as symptoms pointing towards erotomania or a severe paranoid schizophrenic reaction. He elevated a casual encounter to a life-defining commitment, a clear distortion of social reality. When Tatiana began to see other people and distance herself, Poddar's reaction was not a typical disappointment. He became withdrawn, neglected his studies, and would frequently weep in solitude. This is a critical indicator of psychological fragility. The casual rejection of one person completely destabilizes his entire existence and self-concept. His world narrowed, fixating entirely on Tatiana and what he perceived as a profound betrayal. His emotional state declined into deep depression, leading him to record his conversations with Tatiana and replay them, trying to locate the precise moment where her feelings supposedly changed. This action, repeatedly listening to a past interaction, highlights a severe inability to process rejection and move forward. It's a psychological loop of rumination. This brings us to the second red flag, obsessive ruminations and the loss of functioning. He was so consumed by a perceived loss that he was unable to attend classes or work as a research assistant. His personal and professional life began to unravel, a classic sign that an individual is mentally consumed by the singular external stressor, which in this case was Tatiana's rejection. If an individual is capable of recording private conversations to dissect the perceived betrayal, what other more destructive forms of planning might they be undertaking in secret? Poddar confided his emotional turmoil to a friend who ultimately encouraged him to seek counseling at Caldwell Memorial Hospital at the Berkeley campus. This initial step towards therapy, while seemingly positive, became the flashpoint of the entire case. Poddar was a brilliant student. He was now seeking professional help for what he felt was an overwhelming existential crisis caused by rejection. He began seeing a psychologist, Dr. Lawrence Moore, in the summer of 1969. In the seventh session, on August 20th, 1969, Poldar's deep psychological distress manifested in a terrifying way. He revealed his explicit intention to kill Tatiana Tarasoff when she returned from her summer trip in Brazil. This is the third strong psychological red flag: specific verbalized homicidal ideation. Poldar wasn't merely venting or expressing anger. He articulated a concrete plan to commit murder. Dr. Moore, recognizing the severity of this, believed the situation was so dangerous that he diagnosed Poldar was having a paranoid schizophrenic reaction, acute and severe, and that he needed to be committed for observation. Dr. Moore contacted the campus police and requested Poldar's involuntary commitment for observation. Under the Latterman-Pett-Short Act, a measure for individuals deemed to be a danger to themselves or others. This action shows the immediate professional assessment of high-risk psychological profile. When a mental health professional identifies a high-risk threat and takes immediate action, what happens when external systems, like law enforcement, do not perceive the same level of danger? The campus police briefly detained Poldar. However, after speaking with him, they assessed him as rational and released him when he promised to stay away from Tatiana. This discrepancy between the clinical assessment and the law enforcement perception of danger is fascinating from a psychological standpoint. Poldar was able to mask his true state, demonstrating a capacity for calculated deception and emotional guarding, which is our fourth red flag. He appeared rational to the police, denying any violent intent, suggesting he could compartmentalize his homicidal ideation and present a controlled, non-threatening exterior when necessary. Following this, Dr. Harvey Paulson, the director of psychiatry at the time, intervened. He ordered the police to release Poldar and instructed that all clinical notes and the letter to the police regarding Poldar's threat be destroyed. However, no one attempted to warn Tatiana or her parents of the direct and specific threat on her life. This institutional failure is central to the legal case. But the psychological element here is the potential reinforcement of Poldar's delusion. His release, following a promise to leave Tatiana alone, might have psychologically reinforced his belief that his feelings and desires were justified, and that the professional attempts to stop him were invalid. Tatiana returned to the United States in October 1969. And then on October 27th that year, Poldar carried out his threat. He went to Tatiana's home, first shooting her with a pellet gun, and then stabbing her 17 times with a butcher knife as she fled. What is the psychological journey from a deep, debilitating depression to the cold, multifaceted planning and execution of a violent act? The nature of the attack provides a fifth psychological red flag: escalation of violence and overkill. The use of multiple weapons and the sheer number of stab wounds suggests not just an intent to kill, but an overwhelming release of repressed rage and emotional volatility. This level of violence often points to an underlying psychological disorder where the victim is not seen as an individual, but as a symbolic object of a person's internal distress and perceived grievances. Tatiana became the embodiment of Poldar's humiliation, rejection, and feelings of inadequacy. His motive was rooted in his distorted perception of their relationship. He was not murdering a stranger. He was eliminating the source of his profound emotional pain, a person he felt had irrevocably wronged him. This is a classic pattern in intimate partner violence homicides or homicides related to obsessional following, where a perceived betrayal triggers a catastrophic loss of control and a desire for ultimate revenge. The sixth psychological red flag that we see in this case is a post-offense and passive compliance and rationalization. Poldar did not flee or resist arrest. He was later charged with second-degree murder. This compliance often stems from a distorted belief that with the act committed, the internal conflict is resolved, or a sense of justice has been served, however twisted that concept may be. At his criminal trial, Poldar initially pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Experts who testified regarding his mental state described his condition as a paranoid schizophrenic reaction. This suggests that his obsession, his inability to correctly interpret social cues, and his descent into violence were not simply character flaws, but symptoms of a severe mental health crisis that was unmanaged and tragically dismissed by some authorities. Does a documented history of mental instability combined with a specific threat of murder negate an individual's criminal responsibility, or does it merely complicate the why? Ultimately, Poldar's conviction for second-degree murder was overturned on appeal because the jury was deemed to have been inadequately instructed on the specifics of his mental health illness. The court determined that the evidence of his mental state and potential inability to form a requisite intent for murder was not correctly considered. He avoided a retrial by agreeing to the condition that his return immediately to India. This legal resolution, while concluding the criminal case, left a huge psychological and ethical void, which was later addressed in a civil suit filed by Tatiana's parents, the Tarasoffs. The final and perhaps most impactful psychological angle of this case lies not with the perpetrator, but with the mental health profession itself. The civil case of Tarasoff versus Regents of the University of California established a new standard, forcing the reevaluation of the principle of confidentiality. The California Supreme Court's 1979 ruling established the duty to protect, or duty to warn, which mandated that a mental health professional, upon determining a patient poses a serious danger of violence to an identifiable victim, must take reasonable care to protect the intended victim. How did one tragic failure of prediction and warning lead to a fundamental non-negotiable shift in the ethical and legal responsibility of every mental health professional? This case forces us to confront a terrifying psychological reality: the conflict between the necessity of confidentiality for effective therapy and the moral legal obligation to prevent foreseeable harm. The story of Posenjit Poddar is a stark illustration of how severe untreated psychological distress, particularly when coupled with intense delusion-driven fixation, can lead to catastrophic violence against a wholly innocent victim. The clues were not subtle. They were verbalized, documented, and acted upon by one therapist. The aha moment, the full circle realization, is that the key clue, the specific threat, was not missed, but actively suppressed. This is one of those defining moments of a case that revolutionized the confidentiality between a therapist, a mental health professional, and their patient. One of the things that I have to say as a licensed therapist in my informed consent and verbally is that I tell clients that I'm considered a mandatory reporter, and there are certain things that I'm required to report. And because of this case, I learned this way back in graduate school, I'm required to list that way or method of breaking the confidentiality, if you will, if my client or the patient discloses their intent to kill somebody. And so this is one of those defining moments. And unfortunately, this was a case that kind of slipped through the cracks in many ways. Tatiana wasn't notified. Her parents weren't notified. And yet the authorities, the professionals, they were taking action. They just didn't take all the action that they should have. Now we, years later, as a result of this case, we know what we need to do. So what did you think about this case? Were there any elements that stood out to you? If you want more mental health analysis of true crime stories like this one, be sure to subscribe for more. And if you found this case compelling, be sure to watch this next story. It will make you more aware of your surroundings. Thank you for joining me today. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe.